in today's most hackable exotic car series, we are looking today at the McLaren 570S. Now, later we're gonna go on the whiteboard and really see how hackable the 570 really is when it comes to numbers. But first off, I wanted to use this car specifically as an example, which I don't own this car. As always, I'm very direct to the point. I can't drive a 570S. It's something that makes me feel poor. In this particular instance, however, the 570S is the most hackable McLaren on the market, and we're gonna discover why. Historically, this car came out back in 15 and has had a run now all the way up to 20. It's a good 5-year run. It's a really good platform for McLaren. It's a very reliable platform for McLaren, and it's a really great car. I have owned about 4 different 570Ss, and they have come a very long way from their original 2015 debut. Not necessarily because 2015 cars are bad, but rather that ever since their debut back then, they have done a tremendous job at repairing these cars, updating software and things so that they run very smoothly. This particular instance here is one of the most loaded variation of the car because it has a $260,000 sticker. Now I want to show you what that looks like in real life, which is why I wanted to use this particular car, which is owned by Exotic Hunter here in Boca Raton, which we've partnered up with to allow us to use some of their cars in future videos like you've seen in the past. These are the better style wheels. So if you're looking to hack a 570S, you're going to have to either go with these or the double polished versions of them. They are very, very exciting on the car, even as a factory option, even if you don't switch the wheels. The other thing that I want to point you out to, this car has every possible carbon option. You can see carbon mirrors, even the carbon tunnels here, which are incredibly rare on the 570S. The carbon side strake, the carbon skirts, the carbon rear, the carbon top, the carbon engine cover, and more importantly, the MSO full carbon fiber rear bumper, a very rare and hard to get $8,000 option, even the carbon fiber spoiler. That said, you have a very beautiful, fully loaded carbon car. Now, on the surface, if you look on the outside, there isn't any other carbon you can spec on this car from the factory. It's as carbon as it gets, including MSO option, including the front bumper, skirts and everything, and it is superb, right? Now, on the inside, I want to point you to this. The majority of these cars here have these comfort seats. These are the comfort seats, which are optional, versus the P1 race seats, which are also part of the track pack. So if you have a track pack car, you usually have these buckets. In this particular case, you have the comfort seats. Now, for the 570S, usually bucket seats are not necessarily the most comfortable, but the 570S track pack seats or comfort seats are both okay to be hacking. The other part on the inside you usually get carbon is these speakers here. That is also an option. And another option is to get these seals here in carbon as well. You don't necessarily have to have these if you're hacking the car. This is just a very beautiful feature to sit in. The car has plenty of headroom. Again, I'm 5'7", you could be 6 feet tall comfortably sitting here. Lots of wiggle room, lots of places to put stuff. You have 2 little cup holder things, you have a full cup holder here. So a lot of room, a lot of usage, and the car is very, very usable, which is why it's one of my favorite McLarens from a hack standpoint, because it has such a broad audience. There are additional things you can do, such as, you know, the Bauer Wilkinson, like whatever Wilkins sound system. The Bieno sound system is always a good upgrade for reselling the car. And of course, this has the interior carbon, including the interior tunnel here, done in carbon. So this is a fairly loaded car. That's why the sticker is so high. The majority of these stickers can be found between 220 to 230. This is a 260 plus sticker. The highest sticker I've ever seen for these cars is about 275, and that was the car I actually owned, which was a copy of this car with matte paint and P1, including telemetry for the track. So that was the highest sticker I had ever seen. I bought that car. I went ahead and sold it. I modded it and I sold it, but this is a good example of a very high load car, and probably a better example of what's going to be harder to find in the market that you want to buy and then be able to resell. Just so you know, I'm always a big believer that specs matter. So great specs are far and few in between when used. You don't find that many used cars with great specs, so when you do, they always bring a higher premium, contrary to what the dealer model will tell you, that you buy wholesale, you buy cheap, you sell high. And some other idiot on the internet right now sitting there cringing like, that's not right, man. But there's a reason why you're poor and I'm not. So the angle here that's really simple when it comes to hacking cars is, again, looking for very detailed, exciting color specifications. Even if you like white, in this case, you have the two-tone white and black interior. It's tastefully done. Lots of carbon inside, lots of carbon outside. and historically a pretty good spec in order to be able to actually resell it, and being probably one of the few on the market rather than one of many on the market. If you actually Google right now and look on Auto Trade and Car Gurus, the majority of the cars will have stickers under 230K, not making them that great a value. Now you can buy something like this for 100K off of sticker with 10,000 miles, you're doing really good, and we're gonna go to the whiteboard and really see that. Now, if you're still confused about what hacking is, you're watching this video and you're like, what is he talking about, hacking cars? Go into the description and click the link. There's a free video for 60 minutes. I'm gonna break down for you what car hacking is that I invented back in the day, like in 2005, how it's been used to date, how it's evolved to date, how you can use it to 10x your car without 10xing your payment, and more importantly, join Exotic Car Hacks, the ultimate community where you can learn to do this day in and day out, and of course be surrounded by 20,000 other people doing this. Bottom line, the 570S is incredibly hackable. Now let's go to the whiteboard and see why. All right guys, so here we are talking numbers, and welcome now to the McLaren 570S. So we looked at the car a little bit. We looked at what I would consider to be one of the highest loaded version of the car itself, which is nice because it gives us a really good index to understand everything that was available, right? Between all the carbon and everything else you saw in the car, what was special about it, etc. It was all there in front of you. Now, again, remember, we are talking about car hacking here, not buying wholesale. If you still have no idea what I'm talking about, click the link in the description, take the free training, learn about car hacking that I invented back in 2005. And then you'll be able to not only understand this concept better, but learn this financial tool that should enable you to drive exotic cars without losing money. Now, in addition to that, you should join our community where you'll learn to do this and, of course, be amongst other people who are doing this every day, 20,000 people plus. So let's take a look here at the McLaren 570S. Remember, we said the majority of these cars are going to have MSRPs between 220 to 270K when they are new. And this matters quite a bit on the McLaren side. It matters because we want specifically to look at cars understanding that buying a 220K car is a $50,000 difference from buying a 270K car when new. So there's going to be historical differences when at the end of the used car market, even as it hits its lower end of the spectrum, it is still going to be like a car that is going to be different depending on options, and that matters. So, you know, one of the things that I usually say is, again, when we're looking at specifically the cars themselves, we're looking here at 2015 to 2017 primarily for the coupes. Remember that with the Spiders, you're looking at 2018, 2019 cars, and those are not going to be as hackable as the 2015, 2017s. Now, partly because they're newer, partly because they have more room, but the main thing is the price range. Remember, what we do with these studies is we look at the 10K gap of error, and that matters a lot because the 10K room is really the max we can allow for this kind of hack to really position ourselves. So what can you buy a 570S for when on the lower end of the spectrum, you're looking at 130K, and then on the higher end of the spectrum, you're looking somewhere around now about 180K. This is for the coupe. We're going to do that first. Now, the majority of people will say, wow, 130 is excellent, I'm going to buy. Let me not fool you here for a second. At about 145K, that is the lowest point I've ever seen a clean, decent spec'd, good, usable McLaren 570S. So if this is the lower point, basically everything here between 130 and 145 is going to be complete trash. Either cars that have no lifts, cars that have no options, cars that need quite a bit of repair. Remember, McLarens are a little bit more finicky than, let's say, a Rolls-Royce or something more generic like a Gallardo. You're going to need to be very careful because even buying a 130K car needing 2 shocks replaced will put you right at the 145K, and you'll have a much less equipped car. This is why it's important to understand hacking and not wholesale buying. So let's use the room for error here, going to 155. And boom, right here, this is where the hack happens. So the 570S is really a hack in these numbers, right? Can you stretch that 5K? Absolutely. You could go 145 to 160, and this is where options are going to matter significantly. So this is going to matter because based on what you're finding, for example, if I was going to get a 270K high sticker car, that's very rare versus a 250K car, then I would look at that and say, okay, I would pay an extra 8K to have all these options. So it brings me to basically to this point. the hack ratio is basically minus about 100K on MSRP on average, right? So I would say 80 to 100 because some cars are going to be lower. The point is to realize that one of the best hacking strategies is always to look for the highest capacity of car and then to be able to buy that at a disproportion to the lower. So for example, if we have 80K off the lower, right, that's going to put us, as an example, at 160. But if we have 100K off of the higher one, it's going to put us only 10K more, right? So the point that I'm trying to make here is this is what I want you to understand. So if we have 100K off this higher one, we're going to be at 170. And here we're at 160. So the argument here is that there's a $50,000 difference when new, right? But there's only a 10K difference for $50,000 in options when used. So the leverage is to buy that $50,000 in options and basically position it here and give us a much healthier, better car without really losing any money because we're positioning at such a greater discount because of the high option load. Remember, dealers make significant amounts of money because of higher options. And so those options are worth 20, 30 cents on the dollar, but they are necessary for resale, and that's what differentiates the right car. So the right hacking methodology for the 570S is basically to be between 145 and 155, maybe 160 at the highest, to look for a 2015, 2017 high MSRP car. I would say between 245 to 270K is the range of MSRP I would look at if I was going to hack one of these. I've hacked about 6 of them so far in my earlier years when I had a lot less money than I have now, and these make a lot of sense. So I would focus on that first beyond anything else because this is where the value is for the McLaren 570S. There are some things you need to know when it comes to the to what you're looking for when you're doing PPI. So the less driven McLarens are, then the more they break. So historically, I always recommend finding a car between 10, 12K miles and then dumping it before it hits about 17,000 miles. Now, I know the majority of people would want to find a car with 4,000 or 5,000 miles. I would say that if a car hasn't been driven enough, if it's not really out there being driven, then it's going to be harder to get any data on it. Are things broken or not? And they could break later. We're talking now about a 7-year-old car. So 7 years times 2, 14,000 miles or so. So again, if we're buying under that and we're driving up, it's not a big deal. Don't let 10,000 miles scare you. That's not a lot of miles on a modern day exotic. The other thing I would argue is when buying the car, you have to make sure during the PPI process, which we teach at Exotic Car Hacks, but during that process, there are a few things that are commonly known to go bad on these cars. First off, service lights are never reset because people are trying to cheap out on service. Very often you'll notice that the brakes are expensive. They're like not just the rotors because they don't usually go bad, but the actual pads are expensive too for McLaren, so that's something to consider. They could be $3 to $5 grand, so that's a big deal. Shocks are expensive. They're between $6 to $7 grand a pop, and they usually go bad on the 570S, especially if it's been hitting a lot of potholes and things like that. And then other basic things that typically go bad are trim. Trim starts to, like split, meaning like it's very common because the craftsmanship of McLaren's isn't very good. So those are the more common issues you see. I would highly pay attention to not necessarily the history of the car, how many owners or how many times gone through an oil change, but I would really look at if the car has a history of repairs and put it through a comprehensive pre-purchase inspection, just like we teach you in the course, to ensure that you're really getting the car for that dollar. Because remember, if you're getting a 160K car for 130 and you feel really excited but it's got 40 grand of problems, it's not really a savings, and that's the argument. One of the arguments that most people at wholesale cars will tell you, I can buy one for 135, but if that car hasn't gone and been checked or it's a low option car, then the question is, why buy a car for 135 with more miles, less options, and then spend 20K fixing it and be back in it at 155 when you can buy the right car at 155 that doesn't put 6 months of headaches on you, doesn't create any problems for you, and yet gives you a great driving experience, allows you to drive it 12 months, lose no money, and bam, here you are again. So this is what we look for in a 570S coupe. This is where the leverage is. If we're looking at the Spider, it's not significantly different. The majority of Spiders are going to be right here between 160 and they go to 190. The reason why I'm not a big fan of hacking Spiders is because basically the majority of the cars there's very few Spiders with really good, what you would call really good option packages on the used market. And that's because the price point would then go very, very high, and that would tap into a lot of like 600 LT or 720S territory. So one of the things that you'll kind of notice is that the gap right now on the coupe is a healthy 10K, but the gap on the Spider is 20K, which means that it still has room for error, which is why it's still going down, which is why I wouldn't recommend looking at Spider yet for another year or so. But for now, I mean, it doesn't mean it's not hackable, just means that it's much harder to hack. So if you're a novice or you're new, I would recommend sticking with the coupe. It's more easy transition process in and out, much easier to manage altogether. But otherwise, both great cars. Historically, a lot of the quirks have been taken out of most of the 570Ss, so don't read reviews letting you scare you out of 570S is a good car. It wasn't a good car when it first came out. They fixed a lot of those problems, so a lot of cars on the road now are pretty decent and doing. So if you want to learn more stuff like this, make sure you like, subscribe, turn on notifications. Otherwise, make sure you click the link and join the course, and I will see you on the next video for Exotic Car Hacks.